So here's a uncomfortable question for some of you, a challenging question, maybe a surprisingly refreshing question for others of you. When it comes to knowing if God exists, when it comes to knowing what God is like, or when it comes to knowing who God is like, does it come down to because the Bible tells us so? When it comes down to knowing who God is, the creator of the heavens and the earth, when it comes down to what he is like, when it comes down to who he likes, does it come down to because the Bible tells us so or other religious literature tells us so? I can tell that some of you might be squirming in your seats already, and this is going to be a fantastic series. Are we expected to believe, based on a collection of ancient manuscripts, written by dozens of men over hundreds of years who never met, in a world without science, where everybody believed in some sort of God? I mean, weren't they just guessing? Were they just making stuff up? Are we meant to believe that what God is like and who God is, and if there is a God, because the Bible tells us so? Should we be surprised that people in 2022 are deconstructing their faith? Should we be surprised that people are deconverting from Christianity? Maybe more personal, should you be surprised that that's where you're at today? Maybe you're in this room or you're watching online and nobody knows, but your hand is on the door to leaving faith. Maybe the only reason why you haven't is because you're afraid of what your family, your friends, your coworkers, your boss, whoever it is going to think. Should we be surprised that in 2022, people are leaving faith? People are deconverting, deconstructing what they've believed for so long. If Christian faith balances precariously on the edge of ancient declarations of superstitious men, why not? Why not? But good news, it turns out that Christians are not expected to believe based on a collection of ancient manuscripts written by dozens of men over hundreds of years at a time where everyone believed in the gods and there wasn't any science. That's not why we believe. That's not why we call ourselves Christians. The reason why we call ourselves Christians, the foundation of our faith, is anchored on something more substantial, more sustainable, even more investigable. Now, I don't like that word. I want to say investigatable, but that's not a word. So we have to use investigable. Investigable. The Christian faith is investigable, which means we're invited to kick the tire. We're invited to ask tough questions. We don't have to look away, or when someone asks you something that you don't know, well, I don't know, but I have faith. We're invited to not look the other way. We're invited to ask the hard questions, not look away from all the confusing things that are happening in the world that we don't have an answer to, and just say, well, I have faith. And when you say that, I mean, maybe that's what you believe, but that doesn't work for your son-in-law. That's not working for your high school student who is in grade 12, and as soon as they leave the home, maybe they're going to leave faith. That might work for you, but that might not be working for everyone else. Just turning a blind eye to what we believe doesn't work. We have to be able to ask those hard questions and to investigate the things that we actually claim to believe. The things that we live out in our life. Because it might work for us just saying we have faith, but it's not working for the next generation. We're invited to kick the tires and to ask hard questions. We don't have to look the other way. The Christian faith doesn't rise and fall on the accuracy of 66 ancient documents that we call the books of the Bible. It rises on and falls on the identity of a single individual, Jesus of Nazareth. Our faith is anchored in the identity of one person in history, Jesus of Nazareth. And so if you're curious about faith, maybe you're watching and, I don't know, you went to your friend's house and they're forcing you to watch this, or you're here and you're leaving faith, or you just have all these questions. If that's where you are today, there's a question that I want to invite you to ask. And it's a question that maybe we haven't been invited to ask before. And that's not your fault. That's my fault. That's the church's fault. Here's the question. Is Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, not and John, or John, a reliable account of actual events? That's the question that I want to invite you to ask over the next 6 weeks. Maybe you've got that hand on the doorknob and you're ready to step through that door because you just don't know how to answer all the questions that your friends are asking. Maybe you've been given the Bible, but no one taught you how to read, and you got to Leviticus in the Bible, you're like, what the heck is going on? The question that I want to invite you to ask is, are the accounts, are the books in the Bible, are the people of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John a reliable account of actual events? And if just one of those is a reliable account of actual events, well then, game on. Faith on. You should press on. You should lean in. And if you're a follower of Jesus, what that means is your faith is not in vain. The question that we have to ask is Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John reliable, accurate events of what actually took place? This is confusing, again, because of how the Bible was sort of taught to us. And I've got a bit of a timeline here, because often we give our kids a Bible, or our high school students a Bible, or I don't know, someone who's interested in faith, the Bible, we go, here you go, read. And like I said, they start in Genesis, and that's just very, very confusing for people who did not grow up in the church. Maybe it's confusing for people that did grow up in the church, and we get our sequence of actual events backwards, and why we have a Bible backwards, but this is what happened. There was an event that took place. This is all in the first century, an event that took place. The death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. An event took place. And immediately after the event, because of what they saw, a movement happened. A movement happened. The ecclesia, the gathering of Jesus' followers happened, which would eventually be called the Way, which we would call the church. And a movement happened. And when that movement happened, what they saw in the event was so extraordinary, was so eye-opening, they started to document what they had saw. That's all in the first century. So we have the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because of what they witnessed. And then 300 years later, the first Bible was assembled. So don't get this confused. It wasn't that the Bible was assembled and they decided, let's put the story of Jesus in the Bible. No. The reason for the Bible is Jesus. The reason why we have a Bible is Jesus, is what Jesus did for you and for me. The foundation of our Christian faith is the death and the resurrection of a single individual, Jesus Christ. And what happens when we give people a Bible and don't tell them what to do is they start in Genesis and they read all these amazing stories, right? The flood, and Noah, and the story of David, and all of a sudden Jesus just becomes a Bible story. He just gets confused and mixed in with what else happened in the history of this world. And before long, it's just, we're just going to glance over these 4 Gospels, which are the most important things really in the history of our world, and all of a sudden he just becomes a Bible story. But really, he is the reason there is a Bible. He is the story. And so, if even one of the Gospels is a reliable account of the life of Jesus, then you need to lean in. We need to start investigating Jesus. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to explore just one account of Jesus' life, and that is the author of Luke. Luke, the book of Luke. And Luke, he was a doctor, so I'm not going to call him Dr. Luke, but Luke was not a disciple of Jesus, but he investigated carefully the things that happened. He was friends with, he knew the people that were at the scene with Jesus, the closest followers of Jesus. He would have conversations with them. If you don't believe me, just go look in Acts, right? He knew Peter, he knew John, he knew James, the brother of Jesus. So he had all these conversations, this dialogue with people that were actually there. He did extensive research and put together it all in the book of Luke. Luke introduces his audience to the account of Jesus' life. Now, we're going to get right from Luke chapter 1, verse 1. And if you're a writer, we've all written essays, we've all written tweets or Facebook posts or Instagram, whatever it is. That first line's so important, isn't it? You might like type it out and then, no, that sucks. And you delete it and rewrite it until you get it right, because that's what's going to capture your audience's mind. And I don't know how many times Luke did this, but the first line of the book of Luke is so key. The first word of the first chapter of the book of Luke is so key, and sometimes we just gloss over it because it's a word that we often use in our everyday life. But the first word that he says is many. Many. How many is many? 4? 40? 400? How many is many? We don't know, but many, as in this is not a once upon a time story. This is not a could you imagine story. You don't start a lie saying other people will back me up. Many, he says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. Many people were with Jesus who heard about Jesus, and they didn't just sort of gloss over it. No, they decided this is so significant that we need to document it. We need to write it down. Now, here's a question. I don't want to offend you. Don't raise your hand. How many are going to take a documentation of your life and of my life? Well, not many. Not many. Not many people. Unless you do something extraordinary, or if you do something extraordinarily awful, not many are going to take an account of your life and write it down and hope that it saves the test of time and gets included in a bunch of manuscripts and becomes, I don't know, whatever book it is. But not many will do that. Not many even undertook to draw up an account about anyone in ancient times. To be honest, you have to piece together pieces of the life of Tiberius Caesar. Virtually nothing is written about Pilate. Herod the Great did extraordinary things, but there's just one account of his life. Do you know how many detailed narrative accounts we have of the life of ancient peasants, crucified criminals, or famous first-century rabbis? None. None. We have quotes and stories, but no storyline. There is nothing that comes close to the detail and the extent that Luke went into for the story of Jesus. Nothing comes close. No one documented anything anywhere close to what Luke has done for Jesus. And so the question that we have is, well, why so many? Because it wasn't just Luke that documented this, right? Many people documented, and in a time when food was hard to get and providing for your family was tough and you had to, life was a lot more difficult than it is now, why did he find it so important, not only Luke, so many, to take the time out of his day, not just to write, but to do the research and have interviews with people to document the life of Jesus? Why would others attempt the same? Because something extraordinary had happened. Something extraordinary had happened. It was something that had implications for future generations. It is something that directly impacts your life, something that directly impacts my life. Not only something extraordinary had happened, but something good had happened to the world and for the world. That's why. Let's not confuse the why we have the Bible. The Bible does not exist without the story of Jesus. Jesus is not just a Bible story. He is the story. Something good had happened for the people in the world. So many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. He's not referring to them, but to us. This happened in his lifetime. Often, when there was like a famous person back then, they wouldn't have people take accounts or biographies of their life while they were living because they didn't want to have their image sort of changed. And so it would happen often after. But Luke was doing this during Luke knew the men and the women who played key roles in developing the extraordinary story. So just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. From the first, people that were actually there, people that were with Jesus at the time. They were eyewitnesses of an event that took place in history. They were the first ones there. They were with Jesus by his side. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated, I've taken time, I haven't glossed over anything, I've been so detailed-oriented, everything from the beginning. I've taken time to investigate everything from the beginning. This is why Luke begins the story of Jesus and John the Baptist from the beginning, to give the whole story of what happened, not just parts, not where you'd have to go and look in other books to document and put together a timeline. No, he wanted to get it right from the beginning. I, too, decided to write an orderly account for you. I, too, along with many others, it's not just me, but along with everyone else, we don't know how many people took accounts of Jesus. We know that 4 made it into the Bible 300 years later after being written, but we don't know how many is, but many, I too have decided to write an orderly along with what everyone else has already done. Here's my point. Luke is not writing the Bible. Luke is not writing the Bible. Luke was documenting events that happened in his lifetime. He's documenting the life and the teachings of Jesus. We don't take Luke's account seriously because it's in the Bible. Luke didn't know that his account was going to get in the Bible. He was just documenting something that extraordinary had happened and something that was good that had happened. We take it seriously because of who he was writing about. Luke's account of Jesus was written 300 years before the Bible was assembled. He didn't know there was a Bible. There was no Bible. He was just documenting something that was extraordinary. Luke's account didn't become reliable when it was included in the collection of documents named the Bible. Luke's account of the life of Jesus was included in the Bible because Luke's account was considered reliable when it was written. You've all been to a hotel, right? Yeah? Anyone? Okay, so when you go to a hotel, some of them have safes in the closet. Do you put something in the safe to make it valuable? Or do you put something in the safe because it's valuable? See, the documentation that Luke did of Jesus' life didn't get put in the Bible to make it valuable. It was already valuable as soon as he wrote it because of who he was writing about. You don't put something in a safe to make it valuable. It's already valuable. And what Luke had, the research that he'd done and what he'd written about, not knowing it was ever going to be included in the Bible, is a reliable account of what had actually happened because he had conversations with eyewitnesses that were there at the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And by the way, our faith is anchored in the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which puts an exclamation mark on everything that Jesus did. Puts an exclamation mark on everything that Jesus taught. And so if you're struggling with faith, or you're considering leaving faith, or maybe you're here curious about faith, it comes down to this question. Is Luke lying? Was he lying? Would you start a lie with many people have documented this? Let's not get confused about any other questions when people try to debunk your faith, to tear apart your house of cards style faith. It comes down to, is Luke lying about what he had researched, about what people had witnessed? Was Matthew, Mark, or John, were they lying? We can't be mistaken here either. He either carefully investigated everything from the beginning, or he didn't. He either carefully investigated everything from the beginning, or he didn't. If he did, and there's no reason or evidence to think that he didn't, we should lean in because Luke believes in his own account. He claims that what follows actually happened. His account is based on his conversations with people that were actually there. Something extraordinary happened. Something good happened. It's good for you. It's good for your family. It's good for your community. It's good for your neighborhood. It's good for me. It's good for the world. Something good had happened, and Luke documented it. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. I want you to be sure of the knowledge that you have. Theophilus was probably a new follower of Jesus, and Luke said, hey, I'm going to do some research so that you know exactly what you've gotten into, so that you don't have a shadow of a doubt, so you don't have any questions about what your faith, who your faith is actually in. So I'm going to do this research for you so you can be sure about what the things that you believe, the things that you have been taught, so that you may be certainty of the things that you have been taught. Luke wanted to ensure that his reader's faith was anchored in the event. He wanted to make sure that people knew why we are followers of Jesus, why we call ourselves Christians. It was anchored in the event of the resurrection of Jesus, which launched the movement. The resurrection of Jesus launched the movement. So when it was safe and legal and the bishops came out of hiding, they put together the first Bible. That's the sequence of our faith. It's not flipped around. The event didn't become valuable because it was in the Bible. The event was valuable already. It had happened, and people thought, I got to document this. Little did Luke know that of the many accounts of the life of Jesus, his would be one of the 4 that would survive, right? It was meticulously copied. Then it was distributed to gatherings of Christians, and some memorized all of it. Once it was safe, it was sent out to many, many places, and as years passed, it was demonized, collected, and burned. Late in the 3rd century, Emperor Diocletian realized that he would never get rid of Christians until he got rid of their literature. Pagans didn't have literature. This was new. He had all the Christians' religious literature collected and burned, including the copies of the Gospels of Luke. By the beginning of the 4th century, Luke's Gospel had been distributed so broadly in the empire that even the emperor couldn't get rid of all the copies. Then something remarkable happened. After the conversion of Emperor Constantine to Christianity, he allowed Christians to worship publicly, to bring their literatures out. The empire, get this is amazing. The empire that crucified Jesus financed the outworking of the Bible. The very same people that wanted to put a stop to Jesus and the movement, the way, the church, ended up financing the very Bible that you have on your screens or in your laps. That's extraordinary. That is remarkable. Thousands of manuscripts over the account of the life of Jesus were collected, compared, and authorized. They put together the very first Bible. The stories of Jesus in the Bible aren't Bible stories. I can't stress that enough. They're not just stories that go in the collections of the 66 documents. The story of Jesus is the story. It's the whole story. At the end of all 4 Gospels, Jesus is crucified by Rome, buried, and rises from the dead. Jesus rose from the dead, and something happened in the world, and it's why we're here. It's why we're gathering today on Sunday, because of an event that took place in the history of our world. So as we wrap up this first installment of the series, Investigating Jesus, I want to be clear and leave you with this. If you choose not to follow Jesus because it's inconvenient, really, there might be some legitimacy to that. It will require something of you. It will require some of your time. It will require maybe some of your money. There is some inconvenience to it. But just because it's inconvenient, I can promise you this, that following Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life. It will make you a better husband. It will make you a better wife. It will make you a better coworker, a sister, a parent, a son, whatever it is. Following Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life because of how Jesus lived his life and the things that he taught. We're to replicate the life of Jesus. We're trying to be as close to the person of Jesus as we possibly can. And if you do that, you're going to be the greatest person to be around in the world. That might be an exaggeration, but I think you're already all pretty great. But if you choose to follow Jesus and to not just believe in him, right? When we just believe, it doesn't actually translate into action in our life. But if you choose to follow him, as in follow the life of Jesus and lead your life like he did, then your life is going to be better and you will get better at life. And so if you choose to not follow Jesus because it's inconvenient, maybe I can't blame you, but please do not choose to not follow Jesus because you don't think there's anything to the story of Jesus. Very rarely do people deconstruct their faith because of the person of Jesus. Very rarely does it come down to what he did to the world and for the world. I can tell you some of the things that it does come down to. People, unfortunately. Sometimes we can be the barrier. It's like, hey, if that's what Christianity looks like, well, maybe I don't want to have a part of it. Very rarely does it come down to who Jesus actually is and what he did for us. And so if you choose not to follow Jesus because it's inconvenient, well, I want to encourage you to keep exploring that, but please do not choose to not follow Jesus because you don't think there's anything to the story of Jesus, because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the accounts of the story that had taken place, that they were at, that they were present at, that they investigated. An event happened, a movement began, and then a Bible was assembled. And we will leave it there, and we'll continue this series next week in part 2 of Investigating Jesus. Let me pray. God, we thank you for this time, and we thank you for your son, Jesus, for what he did for the world and to the world. God, may we leave this place desiring to follow in the footsteps of him, living our lives as he lived his and as he taught us to live. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.